last one we did.
Yeah. I see some pictures of it, folks. Yeah, that would look pretty nice. Oh, yeah. Yeah, right. Me either. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's good.
We might stay longer.
Yeah, you got it. That's why I feel like the job is down there.
Yeah, where it's warm.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like 80s.
Yeah, yeah.
You sit and I'm gonna look and make sure that you're not sitting in front of it. Good. No, I don't say either one of them yet. I don't know who the one that Todd said. I don't know who that is.
My research said gold is huge with snow and that needs to
I think having great. Well, I think having an attorney on this board, I think having an attorney on this board is needed. Oh, good.
Oh, I know that.
Hey.
Yeah.
There's more chairs over here. You're welcome to sit at the tables. If you keep coming in, we'll break down those tables and move them out of the way and create more space.
Getting hot. Maybe Jane will give you a ride.
There are a couple chairs up here. Amanda.
Every chair in the building is set up now. I think if we need more chairs, we'll probably over fire code anyway. Okay, so we're at 6:30, so we'll get started on time here. Welcome, thank you for coming out tonight. My name is Kevin Netto, one of the selectmen. Todd Boyer, another selectman, is with me here tonight. We have George Labarge, our town planner, and Al Burrington from the planning board here. And the purpose of tonight is to have a public hearing opportunity about 4 proposed changes to the land use ordinance. We will take them kind of one at a time, starting with the resource protection, and kind of open the floor for comments and questions. We don't have a podium microphone arrangement here like we typically have like at town meeting. So people will raise their hands. I'll call on people, I'll try to keep track of what order they went up, but I won't make any promises. And then most questions I would assume are gonna be answered by George or Alan, because it's really the planning board and the planner that have done the work on these ordinances. The select board, we vote to put them on the ballot for people to vote on. But unlike budget articles where you get a selectman recommend something, and budget committee recommends something, there's no recommendation attached to these from the select board. It's just putting out there for a public vote. All right. So I'll turn it over to George, and I think I don't know if you have any introductory comments or whatever, but we'll start with the resource protection zone proposed changes. Do you want to briefly summarize maybe what the changes are, and then we can open it for discussion?
Yeah, I thought what might be helpful is just to give a little bit of perspective on how this came about. I started working for the town back in 2018 when the select board and planning board wanted to do an update of the comprehensive plan. That last was done in 2002, back when the town was experiencing, like most of southern Maine, a lot of development and a building boom. So like so many towns, Durham looked for the ability to put in a limit on the number of new housing starts. And in order to do that, you had to have a comprehensive plan that met state requirements. And basically, it put a limit of 45 new housing starts per year. To my knowledge, only 1 year that was ever hit, and that was the first year that it was put in place because it caused a run on the permits. But after that, it averaged well less than 45, and for the last decade, only about 15 new homes have been built in this town for about 10 years now. Per year. Per year, excuse me. Yes. More than that. So, at the time of the review of the comprehensive plan, we looked at it and said, look, Durham is not Scarborough, and really the plan is not workable according to the state guidelines. So we did an update to the comprehensive plan and kind of the three overarching principles that came out of that, goals of the community were, number one, to preserve the rural character of this community. And then secondly, to preserve agriculture. And then thirdly, to balance property rights with the public interest. So those are kind of the overarching goals, and then we looked at a number of policies in there. So the new plan that was adopted in 2018 says basically keep the whole town rural. And that's mainly done through the zoning that requires a minimum lot size of 2 acres and 300 feet of road frontage for each individual lot. And the idea is to spread out and not have densely developed subdivisions like some other towns. So there was an addendum that was put into the comprehensive plan, and as we're seeing right now with the housing crunch, there could be a lot of more development pressure on this community in the future. So the comprehensive plan includes an addendum that says if and when more than 45 housing units are built in 1 year, or the planning board approves more than 100 subdivision lots, then there'll be call for a special town meeting, consideration of a moratorium, and possibly consider whether or not the town should have a growth management plan so they could put in a growth cap. And none of that goes into play until those thresholds are exceeded. So the current, as I said, the current plan is really looking to keep the town rural. The two main mechanisms to do that are the resource protection zoning, in addition to the rural zoning, and then the other piece of it is the allowance within subdivisions to cluster and create 1 acre lots with dedicated open space, and part of the idea of that is to preserve the natural resource areas and sensitive areas. So that's kind of the background of how we got here, and this is part of implementing that new plan. So I just wanted to show you basically what happened and why this is important to change the resource protection zone. Oh, you sure can. So this is the zoning map that was done as a result of the 2002 comprehensive plan. And so basically, everything that's in this kind of brown color and this green, that is all resource protection. And this is a lot more than most towns have. And part of the reason that there is so much resource protection is that in 2002, they were using mapping mainly about floodplains. Obviously, the Androscoggin River, a lot of the streams that come in, the low areas around Runaround Pond, in the major flood events, those areas are saturated and sometimes overflow. So they based it on mapping from the 1970s, 1980s, and this plan actually was done in 2002 based on that old mapping. Just to give you an idea how outdated the information was. One of the criteria for resource protection says Androscoggin River floodplain area defined by the Army Corps of Engineers, 1936 flooded record. So what has happened in 2018, we received a lot of updated information. The state over the last 20 years has really developed a lot of good topographical information, much more accurate flood mapping. So we set out in the comprehensive plan calls for the town to update the zoning map, particularly with respect to the resource protection, because that's the part that has the most impact on individual properties, to reflect that latest data and make sure that any restrictions that are put on properties are based on accurate scientific information and not old, outdated maps. So as a result, I did an analysis using some mapping tools that I have and some data that was provided by the Greater Portland Council of Governments. And this is the current zoning map, which shows it a little bit more clearly in terms of the Resource Protection District. And you can see Runaround Pond area. This is, I think, all the brook coming in here, that whole area where the outflow from Runaround Pond goes down. And then Chandler Brook, the Dyer Brook coming down through here. There's a headwater wetlands up in here. These streams that go down to the river, as well as the area around, I think that's Swamp Road there. So that whole area drains down that way as well. So all of that was based on old mapping, and the comprehensive plan that was done in 2018 provides a lot more accurate. And the basic change that's proposed is based on that new, more accurate data. Basically, all of the areas in dark green would meet at least one of 6 criteria. Some of them meet more. First one would be the 100-year floodplain based on the FEMA maps. So that's a policy that's been in effect since 2002. 2004 is actually when they adopted it. State shoreland zoning, except for there were some farm fields with wetlands that had to be added to meet state DEP requirements. And so those are not going to be part of the resource protection. But all other shoreland zone around the streams within 100 feet, the Androscoggin River, which includes the floodplain. This is where I think the DOT pile was, right about there. Land forested and emergent wetlands. The criterion from 2002 was swamps. This one, swamps shown on the tax maps, which is not a very accurate depiction of where wetlands are in this community. And then the fifth one, excuse me, this is the in-shoreland zoning. There is a criterion that within 250 feet of waterfowl and wading bird habitats that have been rated by Inland Fisheries and Wildlife as moderate or high value, those would also stay in. And only one new criterion for resource protection is mentioned in the comprehensive plan, and that is areas where you have an overlap of a lot of these different issues. Wetlands, floodplain, wildlife habitat, those areas meet, and there's kind of a rating system that, beginning with habitat, Inland Fisheries and Wildlife Program has developed, and that's all in the comprehensive plan. So, the plan is to update this in 2 phases. And I talked to the select board, and back in October, they approved this 2-phase approach. The first phase says, look, all of this area within the light gray and the dark gray is currently resource protection, which virtually allows no development, very limited development. So, but it's not based on accurate data. And so the first step in the process is to fix what's wrong. And so I proposed, and the select board agreed with the strategy of basically anything that doesn't meet one of these criteria, such as all of this area in gray, doesn't meet any of these resource protection criteria, that would be removed from resource protection and just put into the rural agricultural zone that affects the rest of the town. There are some areas, however, that do meet these 6 criteria, and those are outside that existing resource protection. And once we fix what is broken, then next year, working with the planning board and the conservation commission, I've proposed a 2nd phase that would apply the same criteria to the land that meets them outside the existing resource protection. That would have to be added. Now, we did send out, and the select board directed the town manager and myself to send out a letter to every property owner who has their land either going in or coming out. And so we did phase 1 this year. Probably many of you here, if not most of you here, are here because you got a letter. And I've had several people call. I have developed a GIS system for the town which allows you to look right on an air photo and see where the existing is and where the proposed is. So after this meeting, if you want to get in touch with me, I'd be more than happy to send you very detailed pictures and maps of what your property, again, it's not survey accuracy, but it's probably a lot better than the little map you got in the mail, which is probably why some of you are here tonight. This is a letter that explained it, and this is the back that went out to everybody. So that basically is the plan, and again, no property will be added to resource protection in this round. Next round, any of you that have resource protection and it's retained, the town will consider at town meeting next year if we go forward. And we'll have a lot more time to explore, give more time for people to look at those hard decisions that will be made next year.
I think that those will be, that's obviously, it's a much bigger conversation when you're talking about putting property into resource protection versus taking it out from a property owner's perspective. So like George said, we're not proposing to put anything new into resource protection this year. We're only proposing to take stuff out that doesn't meet the criteria that was established in the comprehensive plan for being in resource protection. And then even next year, people will have the opportunity to challenge if your property is proposed to go into resource protection. There will be mechanisms that you can use to dispute that or argue against it. It's not like a done deal. So that's why we split it into two phases, because that's going to require a lot more groundwork and conversation. All right. So at this point, I'll do my best to direct traffic as people have questions or comments. It doesn't have to be a question. Just raise your hand and we'll gentlemen.
Just a question on section 2.3B B2A, sorry. It says 100-year floodplains as determined by the most recent FEMA flood mapping study. Does that mean if it changes, if the FEMA maps change at any given time, the town automatically accepts it at that point, or would the town need to approve the acceptance of the new map?
Okay, on every one of these, you'll notice the language "and shown on the zoning map."
That one doesn't say that.
It should, and that will be added. Every one of these should say "as shown on the." You notice all the others do?
I did, that's why I asked that one.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. And so basically, the answer to that specific question is that before anything to be added to the resource protection, it has to go through a town meeting vote, including these changes to pull stuff out. So just be aware, even though, and that's why we put that language in there, as shown on the zoning map, to clarify that when something is determined, that doesn't put it on, it has to still go through a mapping process and a town meeting process to approve that change to the zoning map. This is actually, that's the language that's gonna be added. This map will be modified, the current zoning map, based on this map.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I had a couple of questions. George, can you explain where you said some farm fields are not on there, but they had to be on there for DEP? Does that mean
I
they're,
can show you those.
okay, thanks.
So this is the current zoning map, and in addition to the town's growth cap and comprehensive plan not meeting, the town had shoreline zoning imposed by the DEP back in 1994 because it didn't meet the state criteria, and so the state basically imposed that zoning on the town for shoreline zoning. It was a separate shoreline zoning map that was imposed. So in order to get the plan approved and the ordinances approved, the DEP, we had to add, because technically these are in the law. This is off Bowie Hill Road. There's a couple here over on the border with Auburn. And then there's one here, and then another one. So there are 5, or there were 6 large, and these are what they call emergent wetlands. So the farm field, if you look at an air photo, you can see the trenches where they drain the wetlands to create the fields. Great place for crops because you have water year-round. But technically, under the EPA, Army Corps of Engineers, those are wetland and they're regulated by the Clean Water Act. So under shoreline zoning, and it just makes no sense whatsoever, but you have to have a shoreline zoning district around the parts of the farm fields that are wetland. Now, I did include in the report, if you want to get the report, we put it on the website, basically an analysis of this and a suggestion that the town might want to challenge that, because, like I said, it's very hard to support that these farm fields need the same kind of shoreline zoning protection as the Androscoggin River all around pond. But under the main DEP guidelines and requirements, that's what you get. So these were added, but this is limited residential, which does allow development, with some restrictions on buffers and stuff like that. A couple of parts of this, tiny portions, and some of this one over here, which is only resource protection anyway, has to have resource protection. But those are not part of this analysis.
Okay, so let's say that this is adopted,
Yeah?
do they stay or do they go away?
They stay until it gets changed.
Through this
As you
change?
discussed, this is, the only parts of this map that we're gonna change are the ones that are shown on this map, and those farm fields are not shown. Because that's a separate issue, you have to challenge the state, which I think the goal here is to fix the broken parts and then move on to other issues.
So that's more of a phase 2
It
issue.
could be a phase 3, depending on how much you wanna go after that.
But it's not part of the vote at this time.
Yeah.
Is there a diagram that shows what is coming, no, not what's coming out, what's going in?
That's in phase 2.
Okay, so there's no visual of that at this point, okay.
It is in the report that I provided to the select board, and we'll make available to anybody who wants it.
Okay, and one last thing, although I might have more.
That's what we're here for.
The definition of a perennial stream, where can we find that?
It is in state law as well as in the definitions in this ordinance. And basically, a perennial stream is one that has water most of the year. And it's a very technical definition, and there are different rules if it's a perennial stream or what they call an intermittent stream that doesn't usually have water all year round. And they have different setbacks and buffering requirements. So basically, it has to have like a mineral bottom where it's scoured by the running water most of the time. It can be dry in summer, in August, but it's still a perennial stream.
And would it be the responsibility of the landowner if this map, because this isn't on the ground mapping, correct? This is done by
That's
like
correct.
software. So if this were adopted, would it then be on the landowner to prove that one of those things wasn't in existence on their land?
Yes, and there is a process you can go through. As a matter of fact, the equestrian center down on Royalsboro Road, I can't remember the name of it, but they came in and their barn and paddocks and everything were in the resource protection from the old mapping. And they went to the Board of Zoning Appeals. Were you part of that?
I was.
Yeah, you remember?
I do.
So basically, they brought in detailed information that showed, and I showed, that these maps were not accurate. And therefore, the Board of Appeals gave them relief and removed the resource protection from that part which wasn't on this map. But to have to go through that every time is not really good. So this idea is to fix that, not just for those people, but to fix it for the majority of people that are affected in one spot, one fell swoop.
Thank you.
That little gray area that you're pointing to, you said that there were 3 areas, no, on that map that
Oh,
you're
on
in.
this one?
Yeah,
Yeah,
the ones that were added in, you said they had to be added in because of something from
State
nineteen
law requires
ninety-six.
yeah,
Those were only added in like 2 years ago,
that's correct.
so,
Which is when the town tried to get the DEP to approve this zoning and get rid of the state imposed one.
at that time, I thought we were told that it was from 2002 or 2006. But anyway, at that point, that happens to be my property right there, and I'm a little irritated. I was also told that at that time, and this was kind of, the planning board said one thing, I went home and I came back, and it was changed when I went back. And basically, like Heather said, the onus now is on the landowner via, I believe it's called the delineation zoning map that needs to get done. Is that correct?
Not exactly, it's the same idea, but when you're talking about, if you were to apply for development permits, say a subdivision with a planning board, or a single home with the code officer, basically, you gotta show what they call a wetland delineation, which is hiring a wetland specialist. Typically, most soil evaluators that do septic systems do this, and they have to go out and determine based on the type of soil it is, how much water there is, and the types of plants that are there, whether it's technically a wetland. So that boundary in your field, you know, till you do that type of analysis, you can't tell exactly where that boundary is.
Right,
And
but
so
that
then
onus
going
is
out
on
from
me.
that 250 feet is gonna vary, but that can't be done without on-the-ground delineation.
Right, which costs the homeowner more money.
But
That
again, that's
wasn't
state
there.
law, it's state and federal law.
Yeah, but you guys said last time that we have to add it in, and tonight you're telling me that it's been there since 1996, and that
No.
is two different.
No, that's not what I said. I said the town, the state imposed DEP shoreland zoning back in 1994. There have been a lot of changes since then, and I think this was probably added later. But the shoreland zoning imposition did occur back in 1994. So whether the town adopts it or not, the state is gonna apply this. And if you were to go out there and violate it, you'd be in violation of state law. And again, if you look at the report, and I'd be happy to provide you with that part of it,
I'd be happy to
that
see
looks
it.
specifically at your situation and says, look, there is some way to deal with this. Not requiring you to
cost.
go out and hire soil evaluators to do it, because that wouldn't do any good. The law is still the law.
But the law in our area was not in effect until we put it on the map.
No, it's not accurate. The reason we put it on the map, because it wasn't affecting the law.
But if the planning board agreed with what I was planning to do at that time, I would have gotten away with whatever, I'm assuming, I don't wanna say got it away, because I paid good money for my land and I thought it was all usable, and now I'm being told that a chunk of it is in wetlands. So I have to say, I'm not a happy camper. But nobody wants to hear that. And I think how those got in was it was 3 little spots. That was the only ordinance that did pass, correct? Last time when there were things on the board, they all got voted down except for this one, and I think it was.
No, this was 2 years ago, everything passed unanimously. Last year, some of these other issues did not pass.
Okay,
But we'll get into that.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, I own a home on Gulf Evergreen Lane in Winterbrook Estates. I purchased it new back in 1999. And when I went to refinance in 2003, I discovered it was in a flood zone. And therefore, the mortgage company officer wanted me to pay for flood insurance. And talking to lawyers at Pearson Hamlin, and working with Technical Services Incorporated, engineering firm in Albany. They surveyed from the 100-year floodplain at the Androscoggin River based on the flood of 1987, all the way back to the basement of my house. And I had to get statements from town people plus the information that had during the survey. And the survey company had sent all the information to FEMA. And FEMA supplied a, what's it called?
Map amendment.
Map amendment.
Yeah.
My question is, does this change that, or am I still out of a flood zone?
No. And basically what they did was they revised the flood map to be more accurate based on the survey, the flood, what we call a flood elevation certificate, where a surveyor comes out and shows that your basement is at least 1 foot above the flood level.
Yeah.
And that you have to do that, just like sometimes you have to document that on flood laws. So that's part of it.
So I should have.
This doesn't affect that.
Okay, good.
So if other pieces of property end up getting put into these areas of, what did you call it?
Resource protection.
Resource protection, will our taxes be affected in that, I shouldn't be paying top dollar for land that I can't use?
Talk to the assessor. I don't do assessing. Get into enough trouble.
Selectmen, is that something
Yeah,
that?
no, but George is essentially right. So anytime for whatever reason that you feel like your property is not assessed properly for some reason, then you go to the assessor and you say, that I think I'm assessed too high for these reasons, and then the assessor, does the research and makes a determination, yes, you're right, or no, we don't think that, we think we were assessed properly. I'll bet we do 6 to 12 abatements a year from people that have gone to the assessor and made the case that their taxes should be lower, and the assessor says, yeah, you're right, and the taxes have been lowered, so it does happen. Any other, yes, sir, in the back?
Yeah, I have a question on this page here, proposed land use ordinance. It says, the only locations that are required to be resource protection are floodplains and steep slopes within 250 feet of the underside of the river, and then a little bit more there. So where did the emergent wetlands and the wading bird, and I like birds, mind you,
I understand.
not up against birds here. But where did that come in? Because what I'm wondering is, are there minimum resource protection requirements that we need to meet? And are they, if so, are these in excess of those requirements?
The answer is yes and yes. There are, under state law, the floodplains and steep slopes along the Androscoggin River. It's over 20% slope, so this area is floodplain, these areas here are steep slopes. Within 250 feet of the river, if it meets either of those criteria by state law, it must be in resource protection, okay? But, under state law, a town can go beyond the minimum state requirements based on a comprehensive plan that goes through a public process. So, and in order to have restrictions that go beyond the state requirements, the town basically should have good data, and that's what we're trying to do. Now, whether to put it in resource protection or not, that's a policy decision that has to be decided by voters. And again, this stuff has been in resource protection since 2002, right or wrong. And to take it out, it has to go through a public meeting vote. To add anything new in, it has to be through a town meeting vote, but the town has the authority to do that under state law. So we tried to distinguish, and I presented to the select board the analysis that was done. Alan and the planning board hired Michael Morse, who used to be the DEP coordinator for the state, to look at, under state law, what of this must be resource protection under state law. And not a lot of that, other than some areas around Runaround Pond and the Androscoggin River. Has to be under some form of shoreline zoning, but it doesn't necessarily have to be resource protection. So yes, the town has been since 2002, going beyond the minimum state requirements.
Can that be wound back if the
Absolutely
town
can.
decides?
Absolutely
Since
can.
most of it is private
Now,
property.
just so you know, the town did a process with the update to the comprehensive plan, where it presented to the people that participated and ultimately to the voters, different scenarios. One went in the other direction, put more into the resource protection. One said, roll it all back, we called it the Walmart rollback program. Roll it all back to the minimum state requirements on everything. And, like 15% of the participants, and we did a survey.
Yeah, we did, as part of the comprehensive plan process, there's a lot of public input, and so there were several public hearings and workshops, and I think George mentioned at the beginning, like kind of the three main guiding principles that kind of came out of that. One of them was balancing private property rights with resource protection, and that was really the message that came out. It was pretty evenly split among people that wanted to put more into resource protection versus people that wanted to go the other way and take, out of resource protection. So what went into the comprehensive plan was a list of criteria based upon the actual habitat data we had, and that's where the town landed during the comprehensive plan process on what would be the criteria to determine what would go into resource protection. And so what we're doing now is following up on that and saying, okay, based on those criteria that the town identified, in this year, we're proposing taking certain properties out of resource protection because it doesn't meet the criteria that was established in the comprehensive plan. Next year, part two is, here are properties that do meet the criteria, but are not currently in resource protection. So the conversation becomes what properties that are not currently in go into resource protection. But that's next year's conversation. This year is just about what comes out of resource protection.
George, were you part of the comprehensive plan process? You were, sorry that I didn't know that. Who, was it the facilitator, or was it you, or was it the select board that drove the prompts for the choices?
It was a combination of the planning board and the select board had members of the committee.
It was a comprehensive planning committee. It wasn't the select board. The select board
I'm
didn't
sorry. You're right,
really have a
absolutely
role
right. Yeah.
in drafting the comprehensive plan. That was up to the
Yeah,
committee.
so it was the comprehensive planning committee that consisted of planning board and select board members as well as some other citizens. And they hired a facilitator from the Greater Portland Council of Governments.
Yeah.
And so it was a combination of that group, everything that was put out was run by the group, they approved it, both the survey that was done online as well. And you know, part of this is how do you break this very complicated stuff down to either a discussion like this or a survey is even worse to try to communicate this stuff. But I think the message got through and people didn't come in and say, I don't understand any of this. I understand it, I don't like it, but I do understand it. So that was all part of the comprehensive plan process. That is why we're here tonight.
So if we got a letter in the mail saying that we're impacted, does that mean some of the property that we own is being taken out of the protection? And what does that actually mean? I can build a shed now, or, I mean,
Well,
what does it mean?
I'll show you probably the biggest impacts. I was talking about the equestrian center. Okay, so they are right here. This is off Royalsboro Road, just before the bend there. So almost their entire property, or at least more than half of it, was in resource protection. They wanted to do a day camp for the equestrian center, and when we went to the code officer, it's not a permitted use, and said you can't do it. So we had to go to the Board of Appeals and show them basically how this is the old bad data, this is the current data, more accurate, and what they wanted to do wasn't even in the resource protection. So that'll be the effect. Wherever you see the light gray, what you couldn't do before, you will be able to do now.
Yes, sir.
So you're talking about on Swamp Road. I own a huge chunk of Swamp Road, and we're a family subdivision, not subdivision, but we're giving it to the family.
Yep.
I have a lot next to Meadowbrook, and it looks like it's going to be in resource protection.
If it isn't in resource protection now, it won't be. If it is, it'll stay unless it's not in the floodplain or within 100 feet of the brook.
All right, so we've got code enforcement officer, the old one, said it was a buildable lot.
Yep.
We've got a septic design. We have not got a building permit yet, so am I gonna be grandfathered if this goes into resource
Yes.
protection?
Okay, so number one, if you do it in the next year, you should be good to go, because if it's not in there, if it's not, doesn't meet the criteria, it'll be pulled out, so there wouldn't be any restriction.
Okay,
And then if it's gonna be even considered to be put in, that won't happen at least until April 1st. You got a whole year that you don't even have to worry about it.
okay, so my land runs down Meadowbrook. Meadowbrook cuts through my land,
Okay.
and I've got 3 kids to give land to.
Yep.
And it's all close to the brook.
Okay.
All buildable land.
Yep.
If they don't do it within the next year,
They can't build unless they build closer than 100 feet to the brook.
okay, so it's 100 feet. 100 feet, we're good. I was told,
Unless it extends out a little bit more, you can look at it and pretty much tell,
oh, we're 100 feet, that's not an issue.
Right, but the wetlands and the floodplain may go a little bit farther, but you can generally tell by the topography, you can see where the floodplain is.
All right, well, on the edge of the brook, of course, it's high, it builds up,
Yeah.
so it's all
Yeah.
higher land,
So
so
you should be good.
should be good.
Yep.
Okay. That's kind of gray right there.
But George, you'd be willing to talk to him if he came in and showed you his land and?
My pen just ran out of ink.
Don't worry, Darren, I gotcha.
Well, we bought all this land for our kids,
Yeah.
they need to build on it. They live in Durham now, and
Yep.
they keep, get them out of the house, get them their own house. I want to make sure we can still do that in this town.
Yeah.
The gentleman in the back had his hand up.
Yeah, George, just, with regards to his question and your comment that it should be good to go, I own the yellow house at the end of Swamp Road. and, that's about 30 feet above the stream. So when I bought that house, I had to get flood insurance. So somebody didn't look at that. You might look at it and say, it's never gonna be wet, but the last time that yellow house was wet, the last time that property was wet, was when Noah was in the ark. But there it is, and
I
it's still on
saw
the
that.
map. Yeah, you might remember.
My relatives own that house back then.
So, I mean, it's just an observation, you know, that we can't always tell, you know, I may think this land is great,
Yeah.
but their maps in Washington are different.
And just understand, this information is not perfect, but it's a lot better than what it was based on in 2002, which was not very good at all. And we're trying to get more accurate, to be fairer and more accurate on the regulations.
This gentleman here.
Now, that hundred feet back from the stream, does that apply to Androscoggin as well, or is Androscoggin?
Well, the Androscoggin is a zone of restriction or limitations within 250 feet of the normal high water mark. So the streams are only 100 feet on either side, so that's the difference. But there is a 100-foot setback, but it's all resource protection, so you're not gonna be building within 250 feet of the river anyway, because it's either floodplain or steep slopes.
So I'm confused between the 100 feet and the 250 feet, because I thought I had to be 250 feet away.
Okay, so you need to look at the difference between a stream
Yeah,
and a large wetland area like that, or runaround pond, or the river. Streams, apart from floodplains, are only 100 feet on either side of the brook.
okay.
Runaround pond, Androscoggin River, and these large open wetlands, it's 250 feet. From there is shoreland zoning, and generally there's a 100-foot setback within that. So
You just went from 250 to 100, so please,
within the
Clarify.
250, the first 75 feet and 100 feet are buffering and setback requirements. Does that make sense?
no, I'm still missing the boat,
Okay, so
so.
if you're right, if you're either along the river or
It
runaround
sounds like
pond,
it.
No, I'm in the gray, go into
Yes,
the
I
gray.
understand, I'm just trying to explain, unfortunately, the same rules that apply to runaround pond apply to the wetlands in your farm. Those same rules don't apply to along a stream. You don't have to be 250 feet from a stream. It gets regulated, only the 100 feet.
So what you're telling me is around that gray circle, I have to be 250 feet out on any side of that.
You have to get a shoreland zoning permit within that orange, and you have to maintain a 70, which doesn't make any sense, I understand.
I just want you to make up your
I
mind.
know, I understand. It doesn't make any sense. And Mike Morris, the former DEP regulator, said that doesn't make any sense. So again, let's look at the report together, and I'll show you what's in there, and then that might at least give you a glimmer of hope.
And as George mentioned, that's an example of something that is so nonsensical that it may be able to be challenged legally. And if that were the case, the town would discuss doing that, for all those areas that are in a similar situation.
Right.
I wish you could see my facial expressions. Maybe it's better you can.
Hold on, gentleman in front here?
I happen to own a farm field, okay, a hay field, okay, and I think I might have some things, I'm right next to Jane's place there, and it says farm fields are different than streams and all that, okay? I remember when those ditches were put in, I was just a kid then, but
Yep.
my father and uncles and whatnot put those ditches in, and the only reason for it was the big humping hill right next to that field and all that.
Drain down to it?
Runs down through it, runs right across it, that's all. And that's it, right now, it's gone. Normally after almost a record rain, within 24 hours, it's dry again. But, if it's gonna affect any valuation of a property, which, I imagine it might, I'm gonna have to go and get some kind of an adjustment on my tax situation, because, if this thing's gonna eat up all my land and whatnot, lean-to over and back to put some equipment underneath and all that kind of thing out of the way, you know, different seasons, but I don't know. Have to see what we can do, but I'll tell you what, you come up in July, and you'll find out there's 18-wheelers sitting out in that field picking up hay. Big, heavy, you know, 20-ton tractors running all over it and everything, they don't even tire. I run my tractor over it, so it's just about right. So you could say it's wet, but it's not that wet. And, it's just, I don't know why anybody's, I have a feeling somebody looking just to make a point here, you know, the state's never come in and said anything to me, never said anything to the people that have owned it ahead of me. This land's been on for probably 200 years, maybe a little bit longer. And so, you know, I don't know what to tell you, but, you know, I don't like any encroachment on the property that I worked hard for, and, I feel it might be an overstep, that's all I'm thinking. So, we'll see where it goes, but I don't know, I just don't think all this hubbub is necessary. I think everybody's common sense would be better. That's it. You can run heavy equipment on something. How do you move it back? I don't think. Drive around on it once in a while. Drive around on it right now. But,
that is the question that I had about valuation. If these changes go forward, will or could this affect another valuation when we have that done again?
Yeah, I think that similar question came up before. If you feel that a change in your property in its relation to resource protection has impacted its value, then you would wanna, work with the assessor, and make your case and say, I think my taxes are too high, cause my land is now, less valuable because of X, Y, and Z, and the assessor would be the determining factor.
So would the assessor have this information if these changes
yes.
go forward?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
So, just a question, so the fields that we're talking about and some of the other, designated wetlands, that wasn't decided by the town, or you didn't decide those places, that came down from the state? So somebody in the state made the decision that
Well, the
has to
state
be.
adopts laws and regulations that are administered through the DEP. So if you're gonna do shoreline zoning, you have to do shoreline zoning by state law. Whatever you do has to be reviewed by the DEP staff. And when we ran this by the DEP staff, they said that's gotta be in there. In
So
order to
some-
get state approval of your shoreline zoning.
So somebody in the DEP decided those hayfields needed.
They meet the criteria for
Okay,
federal
so-
wetland protection.
Yeah, it wasn't a local
It wasn't
decision.
a local,
What
came
the-
from
Well,
above.
we
map
get,
is
we get to
reflecting
give people
the law.
bad news.
But I mean, the town had to adopt it, but it wasn't a decision by planning board, selectmen, or you that those things.
Well, the decision was to try to get the state of approval, so in a way, yeah.
I mean, it doesn't, I don't believe it would affect our property, but just, would the fight for the landowner that has that issue go through the town, or would it go directly to the state?
Well, that's an issue, and the plan that I wrote, the report, the research that I did suggested that the town and the landowners cooperate on it. And you're likely to get much more hearing with the DEP if the town and the landowners are coming in and filing the deal. So,
I think at a minimum, we would at least have a conversation with town legal counsel on, and with George Consulting on the feasibility of that and likelihood of success, and do we have a case?
yeah, there's a three-part strategy. First is go to DEP staff and try to convince them, shouldn't be. Chances of that are pretty slim. Then you can appeal their decision to the Board of Environmental Protection. It's kind of like the state planning board for shoreline zoning. And so they have the authority to give to that. But recognizing it impacts the whole state, because all the farms in the state are subject to this, they're likely to be hesitant to do that, even if they think it makes sense, and what they're gonna likely say is it's in the law. Then, if you go through that process, you can talk to your legislators. requirements change. So that's a strategy that, you know, whether it's working on, I don't know, but it's probably worth a try. This just doesn't make sense to treat those farm fields like a farm.
I have one more question.
Oh, yes, sir.
What happens if we don't meet the state criteria? What do they do? They put the selectmen in jail, or what do they do? Planning board.
Well, if you are a developer and you're planning to put money into a development and the town says you can do it, there might be neighbors that say we don't think this is a good idea, and they will use anything and everything to make this case that the planning board can't approve it. So, us just saying,
We've already
you know,
tried that.
it's okay, that doesn't get you off.
And the town can't knowingly issue a permit that it knows violates the state law.
No, that's not what I was asking. What happens if the town says, we're not gonna meet the state requirements for resource protection? What happens?
That's
I'm
what
just
they
curious.
did, that's what they did in 1994, and the state came in and put it on the town.
What's the penalty? What do they do to it?
There are penalties.
I mean-
There's been penalties issued against municipalities.
So the town would have to pay a fine?
I have to go look.
I'm just
Slap you
curious.
on the back of the head saying, oh, you bad?
You know, they keep finding you
It's a
until you correct
strategy,
it.
I can recommend that, but that is a strategy. That's what they did in 1994, and it didn't work.
Are we,
Sorry, I had Heather over here, no, come back.
So I know where Jane lives, and I'm looking at that big gray circle, and I'm wondering the Bowie Hill subdivision that's in process right now.
It's across the street up
That
the hill.
is right there.
Are they buying
Okay.
the land?
And this one is right here, so it doesn't, it's not affected by the resource protection.
Is that it?
Mhm.
we're keeping the 100-foot setbacks for resource protection and staying in this.
Yep.
And I had one more thing, is it, like Darren's piece, if he put the house there this year, and then it gets put into it, and
It would
say,
be grandfathered.
okay,
Yep.
and he says, okay, I wanna put a garage on now,
Mhm.
then what would happen?
It depends, it may be affected, because basically what's on the ground you can't change, but putting more on the ground might be affected.
So is there a process that they would be put in place to say, an additional, building can we put on there, this process, so you have to escape?
Again, once it goes into effect, there's not a lot of leeway.
The foundation.
Yes, for the foundation.
Isn't there a house that's 200 feet? Looking forward to phase two. We talked about maybe some tax incentives, but if I realize that, more of my property is gonna be in a protection zone, who can I reach out to for maybe other incentives to, make my property, in a conservation district?
It's a great
For many
question.
communities, I worked for Falmouth for 25 years, and they had a very ambitious land acquisition program. And they went out and bought conservation easements on a lot of properties. That's another tool that you can use. You can use zoning, and you can also use land acquisition programs, but obviously, that's an expensive proposition. There is the, we did some farms in Falmouth that continued as farms. We went to the Land Domain Futures Board and got grants from the state to cover, and then the Trust for Public Land, so it's a public-private partnership. So a lot of communities have been very successful in not using the regulatory tool exclusively, but also using the kind of incentives that can check that. It's an option.
So who's the organization in our area?
Trust for Public Land is across the nation. Land for Maine's Future Board is Maine, so they were talking about putting more money into the program.
Yeah, and there are other organizations too that do similar type of stuff, like Royal River Conservation Trust does some work like that. And
Nature
there's not like a
Conservancy.
one-stop shop.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of organizations that do that.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I just had an administrative comment on the added language. George, on E, so 2.3 BE, after the semicolon, there's the word and, which I think, because it's a list of separate items, you may not want there.
Well, the and means that F is the final one of the list.
Okay.
It's the same as the rest. So there's a semicolon after every one of them.
Yeah.
And then the final one has the and. It doesn't need to be there. It's just a convention they use.
Okay.
It doesn't change anything. If it said or, that would be different.
Yes.
So there's a vote at the town, the next town meeting
Yeah, so town-
on this topic?
Yeah, town meeting, well, yeah, on some of this topic that we've been discussing, so I wanted to re-clarify that, so yes, April 2nd, 9 o'clock at the school. It's always, town meeting's always the first Saturday of the month, you know, when we're not in a pandemic, of April, when we're not in a pandemic. And so one of the questions is what we're talking about today, but again, we're only voting on phase one, which is taking properties out of resource protection. We are not adding the areas that have been the focus of a lot of the discussion to the map this year, correct? Right, that would be potentially next year. Sorry, go ahead.
When would that map come out?
Which-
Phase two map.
Oh, the phase two map?
The phase two map is available now, but we don't want to get it out because we don't want
Okay,
people to
alright.
think about it. That's not what we're voting.
Yeah, I think that horse left the barn a while ago. Yeah, Heather?
Based on what happened last year with the ordinances, if this fails, then what?
Stays the same, it's all still resource protection.
Can you explain, or just articulate why that would be bad for the town, even in terms of you and the planning board? I just feel like there's been a lot of time and a lot of money spent doing this to try to get us in line with the comprehensive plan. And whether I agree or not, I just would love to see, you know, these things, these efforts happen, so that we don't keep putting stuff out to vote and then having it fail. Which I appreciate this, because I think this is an opportunity for people to learn what's going on. So thank you all for coming here to get informed before you go vote. And thank you for, you know, explaining what these things are. But if you could articulate, you know, why it's important for us to pass this stuff.
That's a voter decision. Some people may think this is not a good idea because it's removing resource protection. Some people on the Conservation Commission have made that clear. They're not necessarily on board with this. So there's people in the community that have both perspectives, and that's why you have a town meeting.
If you don't go through with phase one, will phase two still come?
That's a great question.
Not likely.
Yeah, I agree, not likely, but I think if this failed, then we would probably want to try to ascertain why. Like, what was it, was there one aspect of it that people were, you know, really opposed to, or was it just the idea of any change at all? Like, I think we were trying to dig into why, and depending upon what we got, the information there, that would kind of drive what next steps might be.
So there is a possibility of phase one being approved, phase two not being approved? I mean, you're only approving phase one, so if the town votes to approve phase one, they could come in and say, we don't approve of adding any resource protection above and beyond that.
That's right, that can happen. And that's one of the reasons we wanted to separate the questions, because we didn't want one direction to be a victim of the other direction. We wanted, it's really two separate questions, so that's why we've broken it up into two phases. Yes, sir.
George, just to go back to something that you said originally when you were explaining the map, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I think you said is that really the intent of this phase one is to correct something that was done wrong or incorrect map data.
Based on limited data.
Right. So
We
we're,
didn't intentionally say, we're gonna put this on as wrong. We just didn't have any better data at the time.
so we're really just trying to clean it up, to make it in accordance with the currently available data. And it so happens that the way that we're trying to clean it up takes some areas out of resource protection and doesn't add any to resource protection for this proposed phase. We're not looking at adding anything to resource protection in this phase.
My experience in doing this for 4 years, if you have bad information you're basing your policy on, you better get that right before you do anything more.
So I have one more question, I think. Based on what he just said, if phase one makes it right, what does phase two do?
Phase two applies the same criteria to land that is currently not restricted by resource protection outside of the existing district.
If the phase one doesn't make everything right, it just brings.
Well, it makes at least what's right in terms of the data, but then there's other areas outside of that existing resource protection district that will meet the same criteria. We're saying, before you add more, fix what's broken in this area. To build some credibility. And then the question becomes, for those of you who have land in the existing district, should people outside the district that meet the same criteria not have to live by the same restrictions? And that's it's a very tough policy question. But you don't have to. The town could vote to say no. We've had it in this here for 20 years and that's enough.
So why wasn't the gray areas that you expressed are really kind of idiotic, why are they still in there if we're trying to clean up what's not correct?
Because you can't change this without going to a town meeting vote.
Well, we are going to a town meeting vote, but why weren't those gray areas added to the pieces that were being pulled out if you feel that they are not?
Can I answer that? Because the
Idiotic.
areas we're pulling out are areas that don't meet any of the criteria on the map for resource protection. The gray areas we're referring to do have criteria that would call for them to be in resource protection. So that's the distinction. The areas that we're proposing to pull out of resource protection don't have none of the resource protection criteria applies to those pieces of land. So that's what we're trying to fix.
Okay. You said that.
Any other questions or comments on resource protection ordinance changes? If not, we'll move on to the next one. Okay, and then at the end, we'll get through all four, and if you think of something, and at the end, we'll kind of do a cleanup, follow up, notify the applicant. So roads would be the next one.
Okay, so back when the new comprehensive plan was adopted, the first project was to overhaul the land use ordinance, which was a mess. It was copied and pasted, patched together, terrible font, you couldn't even read it. The planning board struggled at every meeting to understand what it was saying. So the first project was to just do a massive overhaul of the land use ordinance to make it a readable, workable document. We put off touching any of the difficult policy issues, like the one we're talking about in part one. Another one was the issue of roads, how the town regulates roads. And this part two, dealing with road policy, has three parts. The first part is backlot access. The comprehensive plan recognized that for someone to do a single backlot and have to build a 20-foot road to serve one house, 20-foot wide road, back 300 to 600 feet. That defeats the purpose of allowing backlots, which most towns do. Single lot, just a driveway. So that's one part of this. The second part of it is we talked about family development.
Yep.
Okay, so currently Durham, like most towns, allows, and state law allows it, to do what they call exempt lots. So if you're doing 3 lots, let's say you own your property, and you sell off 3 lots, that's gonna go to the planning board and be approved with the subdivision. But if you're giving one of those lots to a family member, then you're not a subdivision, and you don't have to get planning board approval. You still have to meet the zoning requirements. Now, part of the difficulty is with your rural zoning, is you have to have 300 feet distinguish that this is not a subdivision. And so basically, it's a common road owned by the lots, and they're not required to get a subdivision approval where you have to look at the wetlands and the wildlife and the hydrology and all of those expensive engineering issues. All you gotta do is get an engineered road design and build it to the standards, and then have a maintenance agreement, because family members eventually are gonna not be here. And so it's important to have a maintenance agreement that ensures that that road's gonna be maintained. And it's not just the people that use it, it's also the public safety vehicles, including the ladder truck that I saw over here the other day, that may need to use it to get to the home, to deal with fire. So most towns have that. What was voted down last year was a proposal to eliminate those private ways completely and make everybody go through the subdivision review process if you're going to build a new road. That got voted down. So I approached the select board and said, right now, the provisions for those private roads for family developments, basically, it's in 3 different places. The road commissioner and the code officer approve the road. The planning board approves the maintenance agreement. And there's confusion over who has authority and responsibility, and the standards are scattered in 3 different parts. So this proposal is intended to simplify the process, give clear requirements, and make sure that as long as it's done right, somebody has the right to do that and not have to go to subdivision. Okay? So basically, these amendments will create a private way section in the ordinance. It's already there, it's called roads, private roads. And then, most towns that I've worked with, the planning board reviews those, just like a subdivision, but it's just a road. I presented that to the planning board back in February. And they said, look, if it's just a matter of reviewing engineering, and it's not gonna be a public process, we don't see the point of having the planning board do it, let's just have the road commissioner do it. So this gives clear guidance. The road commissioner will be the only officer or board of the town that would be involved in the approval of those roads, and that's basically the proposal for that.
So now is it 3 houses, is it 2 houses and then the third you have to have it? Or is it 3 houses, and then if you do a 4th, you have to have a specific width?
Well, if you're gonna build a road, anything other than a single backlot driveway, you gotta get a road approved as a private way. Whether it's 2 lots, 3 lots, 5 lots. So this will kind of clarify and codify the specifics of how you do that, and it'll simplify it.
So if it's already a private way, then adding another house on that shouldn't be an issue?
Yeah, and the main thing is making sure that they join the maintenance agreement. Yeah, now, there's a third part to this. Okay, the third part, so backlot driveway rather than road, private way, road commissioner rather than road commissioner and planning board and code officer. And the third part of this is that the current subdivision road standards are based on that old growth management plan. And that part of that growth management plan said the town will not accept any roads outside of this Southwest Bend district area, growth district. And anything out of that, it's gonna be a private road. So the road standards are really based on whether it's gonna be a public road or a private road. Well, the town has no street acceptance policy, and it's not really accepting any roads, so everything's a private road. So this proposes that the, everything to do that's built, so this proposes to say, what most other towns do is they base it on how many homes are served by it and how much traffic is generated. So they have what they call a minor local, which I think is up to 9 lots, a local, which goes up to 26 lots, and anything over that is a sub-collector. Each one of them is basically, the minor local is 20 feet wide with 2-foot shoulders. And it can be gravel up to, currently under 4 lots, and I know Todd, you had an issue with that, we could discuss. And for 4 or more lots, it's gonna be paved, whether it's a subdivision or a private way, according to these strat standards. Many towns allow that to be a complete gravel road if you're not a subdivision, and you have 7 lots, 3 family members, and a homestead. So that's a policy discussion. So the third part of it is changing from public-private road distinction to, is it a minor local road, is it a local road, or is it a collective? Sub-collective, excuse me. So that's basically the proposal. There's a lot of details there that I'm not gonna try to get into, but if you see detailed questions that we have to try to get into.
So, let me just clarify. I thought that the town was taking on roads as long as they were built to standard. Because didn't, at one point, we weren't taking on any new roads, and then I thought it was voted on that they would take it as long as it was built up to standard, then it would take it on. Am I incorrect?
Yes, you are.
Okay, so. Huh? Yeah, I did, I thought that. So, a back lot, I thought was allowed to have one house. But you're talking if you have a private way, you can put more than one house lot on that. And that, the difference is it's a narrower road.
Just a driveway for one house, it's a narrow road for two or more.
And it will never become a public way. The town will not be responsible for
Never
that.
say never. The town could adopt a policy that says, yeah, we're gonna take over maintenance of all those private roads.
Well, we've been here long enough
And
that
make
we
them
know
public
that that
roads,
flip-flops.
that's a policy some
back
towns
and
do,
forth.
not many do it these days.
Okay. All right, thank you.
When you were talking, about dividing and having 3 lots, is that only to family, or could that just be a person that has a big piece of land and then wants to?
There are several exemptions, but generally, if you're creating a new house lot, it's gotta be a family member. The house, if you've lived there at least 5 years, that's called the homestead exemption. So you could do that as a separate lot without getting subdivision approval. So theoretically, you could carve off 2 acres with the existing house, gift a lot to 3 children, that's 4 new lots, quote unquote, and then sell off 2 to help generate the road to then you still would be a subdivision under state law and under the local subdivision.
Okay, and then for people that are in a situation like that, where there are already 2 or 3 houses on the road that exists already, and then they're going to do more, does the first part of that road, if it doesn't meet the criteria, if they're extending, does the first part of the road have to meet it, or is it just from there forward?
That's a tough question, and everybody struggles with it. You know, you've had some subdivisions built, remember Todd, on Bay Road, and it's like, you know, what do you do? The road right now doesn't meet standards, and it's a tough question. There's no easy answer. Generally, if you're going to be expanding that road, but a 20-foot minor local road, it's gonna serve up to 9 lots, so that's gonna give you some accommodation.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about roads that already exist. I'm just thinking of my neighbors actually, and I know that their road isn't up to. Well, not you, Dan, not your part. The other people. Your road's awesome. Okay, so that answers that question. I just have one other question: is that this is not going to take roads like Dan's Road, Milky Way Lane, right, and turn that into a road that the town is now responsible for plowing and maintenance. That is not going to happen, even if the road is paved, even if like a new subdivision.
Question for
Yeah,
town
the
meeting.
easy version, no, there's nothing in the proposed road ordinance change that would lead to the town taking on responsibility for more roads. That would be a completely separate question, and George has prompted the select board a couple of times, like, you know, you guys don't have a policy to accept any more roads. And we're like, yep. And that's kind of the way the town wants it right now. At some point in the future, if there are enough private roads and enough taxpayers on those roads that, you know, that feeling might shift in town, but right now, that's not where we are. So there's nothing in here that obligates the town or leads the town to take on responsibility for more roads.
So one, with the road thing was irritating to me, because back in 05, 06, I think it was, I asked the town for a building permit on Pound Road. It's a 17-acre lot, which my parents owned. and there's a foundation with a trailer on it, and I wanted to take that off and put a house. And I was told I couldn't unless I brought the whole dirt road up to town spec. And if anybody knows Pound Road, there's a cattle pound, which is there, so you can't do it. So I was removing one home to build another home, and I was told I couldn't do it, at all. And now other people have built it, that's a different story, but, besides that, so the back lots, when do you need 300 feet of road frontage for a back lot, if it's a family member's? Because reading the back lots here, it says that you need a 50-foot right of way. If you don't have the 300-foot frontage, you can get a deeded,
So basically, if you had 400 feet of frontage,
yeah,
you don't have enough for 2 lots, but you got enough for 1 lot plus a back lot. And back, the 50-foot access would be basically the street frontage. And you'd build a 16-foot driveway for that single back lot.
So realistically, you only need 350, is that
You
correct?
need at least 350, but you only need 350.
50 for the road and 300 for the original. Yes, sir? Check it.
If it was defined as a right-of-way, from what I understand, you need 50 feet from that right-of-way, but if it's defined as an easement, you don't need the 50 feet? Is that right or wrong? Because I have a right-of-way in Freeport, and I couldn't build.
Some ordinances
It's called a
say-
right-of-way, I
Yeah,
could, I
some
had to
ordinances
be
say
50
that it'll
feet
be
from that, I didn't know if
setback
it
from
falls
the
here.
easement.
But if it was called an easement, I could butt right up against that right-of-way, or long driveway. And I have one more question, what's the smallest footprint you can build in Durham, for square footage of a dwelling? Do you have a minimum?
Of the lot or of the building?
The building, do you have a minimum
We're
square
not talking
footage?
about tiny homes tonight.
No, I don't, no. No, I'm not fitting in the But is there a minimum?
There's like the Boca building code has minimum square footage for various things, so, but that's a different issue.
But Durham don't.
I don't do building either, no assessing, no building.
I'm looking at the, section 5.7 backlots, number 5 there. It looks like the driveway width was changed from, was it previously 20 feet?
Yeah, that's one of the changes, is if you're doing that single backlot driveway, we changed it from a 20-foot requirement to a 16-foot requirement because it's a driveway.
And just to explain why that's 3 feet, just from what I understand, is basically the fire department has seen these things go in, and then all of a sudden there's 4 houses on it. And so they said, it really needs to be 20 feet wide because they're gonna do no development on it. So this specifically says it can only serve 1 lot. So, and this provides protection, and before a building permit can be issued for the back lot that's served by that driveway, the fire chief has to sign off on it, that he can get his trucks down. And it has to be a turnaround.
This gentleman was next.
So, if you have an existing back lot, is it grandfathered? The road doesn't need to meet any of these new requirements if this passes? I'll be able to get a building permit on an existing back lot?
Existing back lot, you'd have to have a 20-foot road built to it.
There is a road,
Okay.
it's 50 feet, doesn't have an
Right
association.
away is 50 feet, I'm assuming.
The right of way is 50 feet.
Right. And how wide is the travel surface?
It's, oh God. I'm guessing maybe 30 feet.
30 feet?
I'm guessing maybe 30 feet.
Just understand, 20 feet is like, this is probably 16.
Yeah, so in this case, the requirement is getting less restrictive. So if you're okay now, you're gonna be okay later, because the current requirement is 20 feet for, if it's a single back lot, and it would become 16 feet.
Well, there's 2 other houses that service it. I've got the 3rd back lot.
So what's there now is grandfathered?
Exactly, that's my question. So I'll be able to build regardless.
16
Yeah, thank you.
Bill, Max.
Thank you. So I'm just confused, so you mentioned that, which kind of road can be 16 feet wide?
A single driveway for a single back lot.
Okay. And you also made reference to the fire department's aerial, the ladder truck. So for the ladder truck to be deployed, I believe it needs a little bit over 18 feet. So why would a fire chief sign off on the building lot knowing that the new home, we cannot access it with all of our equipment?
Generally, I don't think they put the ladder truck in the driveway leading to the home, they put it at the home, which is usually has clearance, so. And that again is why the fire chief has to sign off on it before they can get a building permit. They gotta show them how much area they're gonna clear around the house, make sure that they can get their vehicles and equipment close enough to the house. And so the fire chief is gonna have to sign off on it before they approve it. We had that discussion.
Why the change? Maybe you said, but I missed it.
Well, the point of having a back lot is so that people can give lots without doing subdivisions. And if it's too expensive, what they end up doing is looking to sell that land to developers. So one goal of it is affordable housing, more affordable, if there is such a thing anymore. And secondly, part of retaining the rural character is trying to give incentives to not do subdivisions for some landowners. Does that make sense?
Not to me.
No? Okay.
How do you get a subdivision out of a backlot?
Well, they may have a lot of backland, they may have 20, 30 acres, and they just wanna do a single backlot for a relative, they don't wanna develop land. They can't do that except building a 20-foot road. Currently.
Or they wait every 5 years to break off another piece.
That doesn't address the road.
So on the topic of the turnaround for the backlot, the proposed language is a turnaround adequate to serve public safety vehicles shall be constructed at the end of the backlot driveway. Is there, I didn't see anywhere in here that defined adequate. Is there any consideration given to giving some general guidelines to what adequate would mean so that someone who's looking at doing it knows where to start at least?
You could do that, this plan says, let the fire chief decide if he can get his vehicles around, rather than prescribing like a subdivision, has to have a big turnaround. If you can get by with less than that, then that's the downside. If you prescribe it, they have to do it.
So, we do have a prescription for a subdivision that's required?
Yes.
Would we maybe wanna consider adding language that says, like, it's never gonna have to exceed this, which is for a subdivision, something that says, here, you might, I don't know, somehow point to what's required for a
Shall not
subdivision.
exceed clause,
Shall not exceed
something
the
like that.
requirement for, something, I don't know, just the word adequate in that just kinda stood out to me as ambiguous.
It's
that's all.
hinged to the fire chief approving it.
No, I understand, right,
You take the
if
fire
you're putting it
chief-
on one person, that's,
Yeah, if you pull the fire chief out of there, then you gotta provide out all the specifics.
It's
This
just-
gives more,
it's a-
this
it's
gives
a
more
comment.
flexibility, it gives more flexibility.
Just a comment.
Yep.
You have 300 feet of road frontage, and you build along the road, you only need 2 acres, the back lot has to be 5. Is that right?
Lady in the white shirt?
Hello. Sorry. So we just had a road through to get to 2 lots in the back that we gave our children. And we have a hammerhead at the end of that road, but their driveways are coming off of that. So I still need the turnaround on that road as well as
Well,
there?
there is where the fire chief could look at that and say, if I can get my vehicles around here, you don't have to build a separate background, you can use those driveways. That often,
Okay, because we haven't, the road's half done.
Yep.
That's another $20,000 to get that all put in at the end. So if I don't have to spend that money now, or I can put it into their driveways at the end, because that's the objective here, is to give our family a place to live. So we're helping them out as best as we can. I don't wanna put in 2 of those turnarounds, if I don't have to. So just one, at the end of their driveway. Is that my understanding, if this goes
if the
through?
fire chief says I can get my vehicles turned around there, that's fine.
Okay.
No, I think so. I appreciate hearing that you're making this back lot and the amendment there, for one driveway, that's nice to hear. It's, I'd like to see Durham become a little more family friendly in that sense. Like what my wife was saying, we've got 3 children. but we can't do 3 backlots. And I would encourage you to move in that direction, you know, because you have people in town here who have more than one child who might like to stay in this town. But there are other towns that are more friendly, you might say.
But I'm sorry, I wanna make sure I understand, are you asking like a smaller lot size requirement for backlot, is that
No,
what you're asking?
no, that I don't have to put a 20-foot, that you don't have to put a 20-foot highway in if you have 3 children. See, couldn't they all be serviced? How do you wanna do it, but just make it a little more encouraging to our families here. You know, so more than, rather than just 1 backlot, you can have 2 or 3, like in our case, we have plenty of room there. The size of the lot doesn't matter. But, it's discouraging, you know, to realize you gotta drop $60,000 or $70,000 into a road that's 20 foot wide through, you know, a lovely wooded pastured area, you know, something that's very sylvan and serene. And you gotta put a highway in there. So I just encourage you to, I'm glad to hear what you're thinking about, you know, but I would encourage you to maybe go a little further there. Before I get my road done.
Any other questions or comments on the road? Yes.
What is the lot size for, over in Aquifer? Is it still 5 acres or has that changed?
Using on-site septic, which everybody is 3 acres.
Is it 3 acres now?
In the aquifer?
Yeah. Oh, it's been 3 acres, not 5?
3 acres.
When we bought the property in 1976, it was 5 acres minimum for a lot.
That was a backlot?
No, aquifer protection. Yeah, there is a requirement that the bigger the home, sometimes you have to, they do an analysis of the groundwater. So you might have to have it bigger than 3 acres, but 3 acres is the minimum in the aquifer protection.
How much of Durham is an aquifer? Could you go with a swipe of your hand?
Okay, so this area right in here, we're sitting right in it. This is all aquifer, mapped sand and gravel aquifers. This area here, and this area here, those are the only 3 areas that are aquifer protection. And basically, that could be a public water supply at some point. And so the idea is to protect that groundwater resource.
Todd? Yay, sorry, man, I didn't.
The way this is written right now, construction of a private way must be, eventually would have to be paid. I would like to propose an amendment to 5.23E. It says, construction of private ways shall meet the construction standards for minor local roads found in Appendix 1, which is a paved road. And add on, except for paving at that point, and erosion and sediment control standards of Appendix 2. That way, your road, for instance, wouldn't have to be paved. You could keep it as a gravel road, you would take care of it, you have a maintenance agreement, you maintain your own gravel road.
That's the plan.
Exactly, but with this, that's not the plan. You would have to pay.
And Todd and I did discuss that, and I offered that language to address that issue. Generally, if you're in a subdivision, you have to pave after the 3rd lot, the whole thing. And for private way, he's proposing to add language. And I'll look to the select board for direction on that.
You know my road, and my road is good to go.
So I was under the impression that you already put that language in.
Yeah, as we discussed, the purpose of the public hearing is to take public input.
Yeah.
And if the select board reviews the discussion here tonight, including some of the ideas that have been offered going farther, you could theoretically have that posted, the new draft dated, and that could be considered. Remember you said you agreed with that?
Yeah, yeah. I thought you had already done that.
No, this is the public hearing, so I didn't do it before, I offered him that language.
Yeah, okay.
We
got it.
discussed tonight.
And so, yeah, I think that would be, the board would discuss that, our next meeting is Tuesday night. Todd will be there, right?
Yeah.
It's your birthday. We'll make you a cake and make you a gravel road for your birthday. So, yeah, I mean, I think if I understand it, the suggestion is for a private way, that it would never have to be paved, no matter how many lots are on it, or what's the threshold?
It's not a subdivision.
Private way.
No, they are. It is.
Well,
A
the thing
subdivision
about
is a private way.
ways is that, and this is a common thing you hear about, and I don't have any skin in this game, so it doesn't really matter to me, honestly, but what you hear over and over again from planners in other communities is that what starts as a back lot, and then it becomes 3-family lots. And then a generation later, it's not the family that owns that land anymore, it's somebody else, and then there are more lots, and all of a sudden you have what really should have be a subdivision, and gone through the subdivision process to make sure the road was adequate and everything of that sort, is a bad situation. So I think a lot of these things are intended to kind of, prevent that type of situation over the long term. So that's why it tends to be that, okay, well, once you get to this point, then we need to upgrade the road. And so I think the language in there now is
After
the
3
third.
lots, more than 3, you gotta take it. Which is what's in the subdivision.
Right. So,
But if there's a maintenance agreement on it.
well, I think we can discuss that at the board meeting on Tuesday, and the board will discuss and vote whether to make that change in the language or not. And then if there's a change, it'll get reposted. Everything has to be posted at least 7 days before town meeting, so basically we have until the 26th to post like the final version of warrants, ordinance changes or whatever, so that would give us time to do that. So we can have that discussion at the board meeting on Tuesday.
George, do you have an opinion on that?
Sure we do.
Unscientific poll, just as a point of information, to take back to the board. So
Oh, no.
if
I get accused.
those that would be in favor of Todd's suggestion that if it's a private way, that there essentially would be no requirement to ever pave that road. Is that what you're saying?
Can I ask a question before we take a vote? Is a subdivision considered a private way?
No, the subdivision is a subdivision. And
That goes through the
this
planning
is-
board process.
This is a little different animal.
Okay, I just want to make sure that those are two separate things. This would not apply to a subdivision.
Right, that's right.
Okay.
Yes.
So I dealt with this in Freeport, they had a private way, and they ended up putting a subdivision off the private way. And I get what you're saying, it is a nightmare, because then they hire somebody like me to come grade the road, well, this person pays this much, and there's no set boundary, so what you're saying, totally.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to think about it as families, but it doesn't have to be families. Like, I have 10 acres, I could split off a lot now, a lot in 5 years, and eventually I have 5 lots in there that the planning board's never looked at. It can be ugly as hell, the road can be vastly undersized, so the fire department can't get down to the last 2 houses. And that's why it's important to think long-term instead of, oh, my kids are moving in here. Your kids aren't gonna live there in 50, maybe they will. But chances are, it's not gonna be your kids living there in 50 years. So thinking long-term, we're gonna have to live with them.
No, but they need a place to live now, and it's family land, and you spend your whole life savings on it, so it's a good spot for them now.
And then it gets put in resource protection.
Sure.
We have a lot of dirt roads here. I mean, why do we not have more dirt roads?
I just bought a new gravel bike, I love dirt.
I don't know why, I mean, why not have more?
Can you say what the language is right now?
Tried to get down it before it was graded, they wouldn't have been able to. So, right?
Down used to have a lot of dirt roads. Like fire department down around.
So just, and again, it's not scientific, it's just a data point, I just wanna see if there's kinda like overwhelming consensus one way or the other. Like, if you would be in favor of basically, changing the language so that a private way would not have to be paved regardless of how many lots are on it. If you would be in favor of language like that, can you raise your hand?
But I think it said more than 3 when it's.
That's what it says now.
Right, okay. So you would leave it to say that.
2/3 of the room, I guess, is that a fair estimate?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So we will, and there is there's always a public comment period at the select board meeting, so if you wanna come and express your opinion on this, we'll put out the board will discuss it, then you're certainly welcome to come and provide. All right, yes, sir.
I've been having conversations actually with a construction guy about building a road, and what he's spoken about quite a bit is a 14-foot road, which he led me to believe that was sort of standard. Is 16-foot standard, or?
Well, my son-in-law and my daughter live on a private way in Falmouth that's about 14 feet wide. And basically, when he's driving his truck, and I'm driving in with my little car, one of us has to get off the road to be able to pass. So that's kind of the issue. Typically, a travel lane on a road is 10 feet wide, minimum. You give you some clearance. So 16 feet, I think, for a driveway. And again, part of the issue is getting a large fire apparatus down that driveway. 16 feet is kind of the same. Could be less, could be more. Fire departments would say make it 18 feet.
I have some questions about parking, and I know that that's part of this part, so I just didn't wanna move out of roads, cause they did have questions about parking, but we can wait till we're done with the roads part to get to those.
Anything else on roads before we move to parking? Yes?
Sorry, I have a pile of comments.
Oh, what?
I said I have a whole pile of administrative comments on the proposed language. But the functional, I think my functional comment here is, there's a proposed change from 10% grade within the right-of-way for a driveway to 3% grade within the right-of-way for a driveway. Which is, 3% is only 1.7 degrees, which is almost completely flat. So I was just, there wasn't anything, really any justification in here as to why that was being done, if it's, maybe it's a standard, you know, I
It
don't
is
know.
a standard, because if you think about it, if you live on a hill and you're coming down to the road, and you go 10% all the way to the shoulder of that road, on a slippery day, you could be out in the road. Similarly, if you're on a downslide of a road and you're trying to get up on the road,
Yeah,
and it's 10% right to the road right away, that's a very difficult thing to get onto. So typically, most towns have within the right of way of the road, maximum 3% grade from there. So basically, you create one landing for one vehicle.
so,
That's the idea.
so 3% is kind of the standard that most towns have, okay?
Isn't that the state?
If you were getting an MDOT permit, yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry, I have a bunch of administrative comments and questions on the proposed language. 5.2, the first sentence in 5.2, I don't think that you need, on the last sentence there, I don't think that you need, if they are addressed during the planning board review. I think it may be covered already in the sentence. I think that's redundant earlier in the sentence.
Well, yes and no. The reason it's in there is to clarify that that's something that the planning board has to look at. And if they do, and they basically review that, typically with input from the road commissioner or peer review engineer, then they don't have to get a separate permit from the public works director. So it's in there to say, and it has to be discussed at the planning board meeting to be exempt from the road commissioner permit requirement. That's the intent.
But it's, right, but it says that, I think it says that already in the beginning of the sentence, where it says, except that driveways and commercial entrances approved by the planning board during subdivision or site plan review shall not be required to have a separate review for compliance with these standards. I think that's covered in that first part, but anyway, that's just something to consider in the language, that's a comment.
You an attorney? No, I'm serious, you should think about putting your hat in the ring for a planning board seat if it ever comes open.
I have spent 18 years, my entire career dealing with requirements. My job is to interpret requirements. That's what I do. So I work for the government. I'm not an attorney.
I take back what I said.
5.7A. If a backlot is accessible only by a legally enforceable right-of-way, it may be used to create required road frontage for one single backlot if the following conditions are met. The "it" after the comma, I realize that this is existing language, but the "it" after the comma refers to the backlot, not the right-of-way, because of the sentence structure. Understand what it's trying to accomplish, but
Believe me, there could be a lot of language in this ordinance that could be improved.
Sure, so just, you may wanna consider that for improvement.
Yeah.
The 5.7A2, at the, I think you wanted to cross out the word placed as well after such servitude is. You've crossed out such servitude is, I think you also wanna cross out the word placed.
You're correct. That's a typo that's easily fixed.
5.23, the first sentence. I think you want the word wide after 50 foot before the word private.
I'm sorry, where are you again?
Sorry, 5.23.
Oh, yes. 5.23,
Yeah,
and where were you?
the first sentence.
50-foot wide private way?
I think that's what you want there, I'm not positive. I think that
Yeah,
was the
they're
intent.
typically shorthand called 50-foot private ways. but-
Okay, that's,
Yep.
yeah, and like, I don't deal with land
Yep.
rules, so that's.
Is it possible to kind of go over some of this after the meeting, some of these minutiae details?
Works for me.
Yeah, is that
I don't care.
is that okay with you? Okay, all right, so we will, keep things moving, thank you, sir. Heather, did you wanna talk about parking?
Yep. So this is about two things.
Heather, just before you do that, can I just explain that part of it?
Yes, please, yep.
Yeah, so right now, the commercial parking standards are in the roads appendix of the subdivision regulations where nobody really would know that they're there. So what this does is moves the commercial parking, non-residential parking standards out of the roads appendix into the site plan review section, which typically goes to review commercial developments. So that's the intent. There really weren't many standards in there, so these seem to be the ones that would be applicable to a town like Durham. So that's what's there.
Okay, and so, my question is, are two things. One, if people have existing conditional use permits, do these standards apply?
Only if you come in to expand your
Okay.
situation.
And then my other question is, I guess it's about this, but I just want to address the grandfathering thing because for all of this, because I know that like I heard Darren saying, as long as he does it, that he's grandfathered within the next year or whatnot. So I want to make sure that it's really clear about what would be grandfathered and what would not be grandfathered, because I know that we've been in a situation, you know, with the planning board and things that exist where people are under the assumption that they're grandfathered, but then that's not necessarily the case. So I really think clarity on that is important, especially for people like in Darren's situation or business situations or that type of thing. I don't know how to do that through the ordinance.
Yeah.
I don't,
Legally, the issue is you're grandfathered at the point that the new regulation goes into effect, if it existed prior to that new ordinance being enacted. After that, you're gonna meet the requirements either to put in something new or to expand something that's there that wasn't in existence before that regulation went into effect.
and then how would it be affected if things changed at the state level? Like, I'll just talk about daycares, even home daycares, right? There's been a change where even if you have a license.
You can't change the local regulation without going to town meeting, even if the state does change it.
Okay, that's good to know. Because they changed that even if you have a license, you now have to submit approval from your town for your septic. And I know that probably 80%, maybe higher, of the daycares in town have not had their septic looked at. And so I don't know how the town will reconcile that.
Separate issue.
Is that it on parking?
Yep, I just wanted to know what happened to the existing places. Thank you.
Just a quick question on, as a follow-up on another question on the grandfathering. Is that written down somewhere? Like that if an ordinance is passed and something was previously existing, that's grandfathered? Is that in an ordinance or something?
Yeah, it's in there just as a general, that once the ordinance is, it says it becomes effective as of the date of this ordinance.
Oh, okay.
That applies to the whole thing. Yeah. And there are a lot of legal cases that have been discussed that.
Even though we're accepting in parts, would that still then be the case?
Only the parts.
Okay, but it will say that. Like how you just said that it says,
So this ordinance at the beginning says, any change to this ordinance becomes effective on the date of enactment. So that's the effective date. There is a non-conforming uses stand section, but again, we haven't dealt with that language, it could be improved, but right now we're not dealing with that. We're dealing with roads, we're dealing with back lots, and we're dealing with resource protection, and hopefully appeals and fees.
Anything else on roads? Okay, we're gonna move on to the changes to the appeals process.
Yeah, this one's even quicker, maybe not as necessarily as controversial, but it's at least quicker. So 2 parts to change it. In Ann, the home planning board chair, actually drafted this. And it basically, right now, out of the 19 articles, 9 of them have individual appeal provisions. Some of these were put in, like mobile home park ordinance, historic preservation ordinance got pulled in. They still have their appeals provisions. Article 17 is the general guideline for granting appeals. So what this does is it eliminates all of those stray individual provisions and just has one that applies to everything. That's one change. Second change is that currently the Board of Appeals has the authority under state law as well as local regulation to review and appeal of a decision of an officer, code officer, road commissioner, or board, planning board, historic, district commission, and even the select board on certain issues. And so the board, somebody that is unhappy, thinks that they didn't apply the ordinance, if they made the wrong decision, they can appeal that to the appeals board. Appeals board can say, they applied the standards, I know you don't like the result, but they followed the ordinance and the legal procedures for getting their permits. Therefore, we uphold the decision of the code officer, road commissioner, or board. Secondly, if you make a case in your appeal that, no, they didn't apply the standards, you didn't follow proper procedures, then the Board of Appeals can overturn the decision and have them go back and do it again. Thirdly, if they think that there's a few, all the standards were met, the procedures were missed, they can remand it back for further deliberation, and that then amends the decision. currently, the ordinance also says they can modify the decision. So the Board of Appeals could take away conditions of approval or add conditions of approval, basically second guessing the appointed and elected people to do this. So this is a proposal to keep the other parts intact. They can uphold, overturn, or remand, but they can't modify the decision of another group in town. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, the issue we ran into was, the planning board had held a hearing on a particular application. Planning board did a site visit, looked at all the materials, taken multiple testimony. It went up to the Board of Appeals. The Board of Appeals that had done none of that on the groundwork, sort of second guessed the planning board, got some things wrong, caused chaos, a little bit of chaos. And so this says, appeals board, if you disagree with it, you send it back to the planning board to start over.
Questions or comments on that?
Is that common practice, removing that compared to other similar towns? To not have that ability to modify a decision?
So other towns typically have one of two processes. Either the Board of Appeals will hear what's called de novo, which means they'll hear it again, which means they'll take all of the information a second time, or they'll have this what's called an appellate standard, which means we just look and see if the lower body screwed up, and if they screwed up, we send it back to them to fix it. We have this weird hybrid right now that doesn't work, where they don't take the information, but they have the ability to modify it. So we put in the appellate piece, so it's getting sent back to the planning board, where they've heard the public testimony, they've done the site walk, they've reviewed all the plans, with basically guidance from the Board of Appeals that you interpreted this section wrong, or you applied that section wrong, or something like that.
Yes, sir. The language says that there's no new evidence allowed in an appeal, and I was curious what the reasoning is behind that. If maybe something has come to light, or I don't know, that new evidence that was used in the appeal, and then when it goes, and then also still then used when it goes back to the planning board.
Defer to Senior Board on that.
I mean, the idea is that it should be heard, if the planning board is the board that's hearing it, the planning board should hear everything. So there's
Sure.
no like, gotcha.
No,
At the Board of Appeals level,
I would,
right?
yeah, and I agree 100% with the idea that it should go back to the planning board. Just, I don't know, that was, it was a question. I'm not sure I agree with it, but that's fine. In the individual sections, like for the code enforcement officer, and this is in each of the sections, it says the Board of Appeals may hear and decide appeals. The may implies that there's a question of whether or not that will happen. How is that, I would think it would say shall hear and decide, but how is that decision to hear an appeal made?
They file an application for appeal, and then the board considers whether it is a valid appealable issue.
So there are issues of like
Okay, so that's why it's,
jurisdiction or
that's,
standing.
Yeah, so fine.
Anything else on appeals? And the final one is about fees that are currently embedded in several different ordinances.
One for that?
Oh, yeah, I'll take this one. So right now, like you said, there are fees for everything from building permits to things that developers need to provide, when they're doing a subdivision, junkyard application fees, I mean, you name it, it's all buried in the ordinance, and to change an ordinance, we have to go through this process, so and then vote on it at a town meeting, so if we wanted to raise the building permit fee by $5, we'd have to go through all of this. So the proposal is to pull out of all of those fees out of the language of the ordinances and authorize the select board to annually set the fee schedule for the year based upon, actual cost to the town, to make sure that we're truly recouping the cost that's incurred in doing some of these things, and that it's, appropriate in the market, like it's comparable to what other towns are charging. So that enables the board, in a public meeting to, update the fee schedule once a year. Once it's set, that's the schedule for the year, and allows us to keep that updated without having to go through a arduous ordinance review town meeting process. So that's, the object is to make sure the town is getting the money it should get from those types of things. Any question? Oh, you have it?
I don't have a question, I just have a comment. I compiled data from 9 different towns of similar population and geographic size to compare a bunch of things. And so everyone that you can talk to about these changes, please advocate strongly for this. Our permit fee revenue was around $32,000, I think. I did it for 2019 so that all the COVID strangeness didn't come into play. Most of those other towns that I compared to were at least $100,000 to $120,000 in revenue that's generated by these types of fees. And so when we're looking at ways to generate revenue to help offset our tax bill, this is one of the ways that would very easily accomplish that. So please advocate for this to everyone that you talk to.
So did you find that there were fees that weren't being paid, or they were just higher fees?
Both.
I didn't see anything in here that, in any way limits the amounts that the select board, can apply to the fees schedule. I do think that, I agree that this is the right, general approach that we should be pulling them out of the ordinances. They're scattered around the ordinances. It's a good way to clarify it, to have a separate fee schedule. I think it would be good to have some kind of limit, maybe in a percentage, into how much annually they can be increased by the select board without a vote by the town. I think that would be a really great addition to this proposal. Because
the only time the town can vote on something is a town meeting, so we would.
Understood, yeah.
We'd be in essentially the same
Well,
situation.
right, but so what I'm suggesting is like
Not above a certain.
double or triple of the
Right.
previous year's fee schedule would be allowed without a vote at town meeting, right?
Right,
So
yes.
so then, and
Right.
so here's my point, right? Without some type of limit, they can set it to anything without the town's participation, right? So I do think I think the general approach is good. I just, as a member of the town who maybe wants to apply for a permit for something, I'd like to still have some level of control over that, personally, that's just my opinion. So,
Yeah, a couple of thoughts on that, because number one, the fees for some things haven't been changed for decades, so you may need some significant increases just to
and
cover, and the other thing is, this language in here says, based on a cost analysis of what it actually costs the town, so they're not just saying, let's do this. And secondly, comparison with other towns to see if they're in the, so there's some guidance there.
So so part of that suggestion would be to come to town meeting with a proposed fee schedule for the first year, right? And then we go from there, right? We've already got a basis to proceed from. So that's just my suggestion.
Okay, Keith?
Kevin, you mentioned you set the fee at the beginning of the year. Why wouldn't that go to town meeting as a warrant line article? Whatever the fee structure is for that year, so that the town has to vote on it.
Yeah, I guess there's no reason to.
And that's basically what you're saying, right? You want the town to approve that fee structure.
No, he's saying that only if it goes over a certain percentage up.
I think either's an option, personally. I think we definitely need to pull them out, revise them. I think they need to be updated 100%. Have a separate fee schedule. either approach there is valid for,
Have a fee schedule, but have it go to town meeting for approval.
Yeah.
or a limit on how much the select board can increase it in a given year, like maybe based on a
Prior to,
percentage basis.
yeah.
I guess you know, the argument against doing that, one would be to, you know, leave some flexibility in the hands of the select board. There's so much that has to be done to get ready for town meeting between, you know, the audit and the budget and the whatever, that quite honestly, just from a pure bandwidth aspect, it would be nice to be able to do the fee schedule like after town meeting, for instance, you know, or set it well before town meeting, you know.
You say you can't do it after, because you need to know how much revenue is
I'm
coming.
sorry, go ahead.
I said you wouldn't be able to do it after, because you need to know how much revenue to anticipate coming in.
Yeah, that's a good point, so, I mean, it doesn't matter, one way or the other, but,
Does this also give the board the ability to add and or remove any fee as it wants? Without going to the town? Rather than just changing the prices, I mean, it could add or remove any fee it felt necessary?
I think it was.
As currently drafted, I think that's the case, yeah.
I mean, I can't, you know, I can't sit here and say that, yeah, we're thinking about 3 fees we wanna add to, you know, we're really just looking at the fees we currently have and, bringing those up to par with what other towns in the area have. But in the course of doing that market analysis, if we discovered that, geez, you know, most towns are charging X for this other thing that we're not charging for, maybe that's something that the board would consider and would add, to the schedule.
So we feel like we would need to change them more than once a year?
No, it's once a year. I believe
So
that's what the
town-
ordinance
so, right,
says.
right, so town meeting once a year, vote on it?
Is it,
It varies, but it's usually close to 40.
is the article here, it's gonna be in the warrant? Do we-
Do you have the text of the? Well, the way what ordinance is, they're worded that you approve the changes as shown, you know, so like, we don't print the entire text of the ordinance in the warrant, it's referenced.
I don't have that one, because that was added after the budget committee meeting that I attended. But the other one reads, so for example, the one on the appeals process, it says to see if the warrant article is to see if the town will vote to enact amendments to the land use ordinance as set forth in the document, is the title of this one. To eliminate redundant and conflicting appeals provisions and clarify the authority of the Board of Appeals to modify decisions. So the language of move it into a fee schedule to be reviewed by the select board annually based on cost analysis and comparison with other towns is what the warrant article says.
And we could do that in October, have it ready, you know, before budget season.
But if you wait for town meeting, that's April, you're already into the year.
This year, that would have made a difference.
Right.
The inflation from that change from October to.
But why couldn't you structure it so that you change it and then at the town meeting, you're voting in for the following January, those fees? For the calendar, for a calendar year. I don't know.
I think if we were gonna do it at town meeting, I would add the date that it's the fee schedule effective on May 1st or something like that.
I think the first adjustment
Right.
would be the critical one. The other ones will be small amount.
So you
Rises in fees.
But I think regardless of the specifics, I'm definitely, at least in this room, hearing, you know, a desire to have that fee schedule voted on at town meeting.
I was just gonna say, by doing it the original way, you've got an extra year of income that's gonna start coming in May or whatever, versus waiting a whole another year, losing 70, 80,000. It's a significant amount of money.
I think, so I think if we were going to alter the language to bring it, to a town meeting eventually, I think I would advocate for language that would say, in year one, we didn't have to do that, so that we could set it and realize the revenue for the rest of 2022 that we wouldn't want to miss out on, and then say in subsequent years, the fee, the schedule, will be approved, will be voted on at town meeting.
I think I completely agree with what everyone is saying. I wasn't thinking of it from a resident standpoint. I don't know why I wasn't thinking of it that way. I'm always thinking about it from a developer standpoint, and so I'm looking to capture those revenues that we're missing out on. But the other thing that I don't even remember who brought it up was that, I think it was actually Kathy, that when people come in to pay for something, right, all the fees are everywhere in the ordinance. And so there are fees that are not captured because they're not in a sheet, one sheet where they can look quickly and assess the charges that are necessary because they are spread throughout the ordinance. So even if we went to a separate fee schedule that gets changed, voted on a town meeting, whatever, I think pulling it out and making it so that the people who are working in the office can easily assess fees as they're paying for things is really important.
Any other comments on the fee suggestion? All right, so that's all four of the proposed ordinance changes. Anybody have any last follow-up questions? So, I wish more people were still here to hear this, but I really want to thank George, and I hope people realize how incredibly fortunate we are to have someone of George's caliber working for the town. He's definitely overqualified for a town the size of Durham, but we're very lucky to have him, and he's been a tremendous resource. So thank you for all the work that you put into this. And I guess no other questions, then we're done. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm gonna come talk to you. Hold on one second. Let me figure out how to get this out of here. Hold on. Everybody's still watching us here.